Organized labor is frustrated with both Republicans and Democrats. AFL-CIO President Richard Trumka says Republicans promised more jobs, but they're using a wrecking ball against working Americans. And Democrats, he says, are letting them do it. The question is, can President Obama do more? Rich Trumka joins us now live from our Washington bureau. Welcome to In Business, sir. We got this disappointing ADP employment report today. It raises questions. Do you think the Obama administration has done enough to create jobs?
I don't think anybody's done enough to create jobs. The government just met with the Chinese, and the government, the Treasury Department, said that the Chinese whole government is geared towards creating jobs and full employment, and our government policy is geared towards more savings. We need to have jobs, jobs, and more jobs, and I think all of us, every last one of us, can do more to make that happen.
Do you then, as I've heard you say before, believe that the administration is wrong in its approach to make the deficit and questions about this country's spending the front page economic issue?
Absolutely. It's taken us in the wrong direction. And it's a distraction. We have a midterm or a long-term deficit problem, but in the short term, we have a jobs crisis. You have nearly 14 million people out of work. You have 25 million people that are underemployed or that have dropped out of the workforce. We need to create jobs, and we need to do it quickly. And by cutting isn't putting anybody back to work, and it's going to make the deficit problem worse in the long run. The best way to solve the deficit problem is to put 14 million people back to work, and the deficit will disappear in the mid and the long term.
You've also been critical of Congressman Paul Ryan and his plan on how to solve some of the budget issues here because of the job destruction that you say it would cause. So what is it that you're looking for? I mean, what's the engine for job creation from your perspective?
Oh, infrastructure is one of them. And you're right, Ryan's budget is horrible. He says it's a deficit reduction budget, and he cuts $4.3 trillion out of the budget, most of which is going to help working Americans and the elderly. And then he gives $4.2 trillion of it back to the rich and to corporations. So it is bad. We're looking at infrastructure. We're looking at green jobs. We're looking at aid to state and local governments to prevent layoffs in the state and local governments and targeted job creation. All of those things can help. All of those things can put people back to work pretty quickly.
It sounds like to achieve that, though, you're asking for another form of a stimulus package. I mean, do you think that government spending is already at high levels? Are you comfortable with adding on to that in terms of further stimulus?
Now, look, ExxonMobil just made $45 billion, and the United States sent them a check for $159 million in rebate. There's money out there to be had, but you can take money and invest it. It's not stimulus, it's an investment in the future. If we create jobs, that generates revenue that'll put and demand that'll put the economy back on a solid footing and make all of us live a little bit better.
But you would be asking that of the private sector itself. You're asking the government to encourage the private sector to create more jobs.
Yes, the private sector has to create more jobs. The banks aren't loaning, even though they got TARP money and they're making record profits. Again, they're not loaning to small and mid-sized businesses the way they should to create jobs. So everybody in the private sector has to help, and we're actually trying to help as well. The labor movement's putting together a fund that an infrastructure fund, so that we can leverage private funds to help create infrastructure and put people back to work as well.
How does that work?
Well, we take pension money and be able to use it in the fund. And you have things like the Infrastructure Investment Bank. We would create the fund, leverage it up so that we could have a lot of projects, put people back to work, and make a profit for the lenders.
Well, one way that the unions have exercised some considerable muscle is in terms of financial support. Your agency spent about $50 million on behalf of Democratic candidates in 2010. Are you going to be supporting Democrats as energetically in 2012 as you have, given your frustration?
First of all, that's not accurate. We didn't spend $50 million.
What is accurate? That's according to our data. What is it?
We spent money energizing, educating, and mobilizing our members. The AFL-CIO gave no money to candidates. We actually energized our members and got them out so that they went to the polls and they were well informed and voted. We'll continue to do that. We'll continue to support our friends, whether they're Democrat or Republican. We will not do as much for our acquaintances, and for our enemies, obviously, we won't.
So it sounds like saying that it's going to be voting down a Democratic line isn't accurate. You would be supportive potentially of some Republican candidates here.
We have been supportive of Republican candidates in the past, those that are friends. Unfortunately, with this party moving further and further and further and further to the right, the number of candidates that actually support working people is getting fewer and fewer. The best day that we could have would be having a Democrat and a Republican that are both friendly to workers running against each other.
All right. Richard Trumka, thank you for your time. President of the
Thanks for having me on.
AFL-CIO.